Good morning, and thank you for finding time to be with us today. The show is Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and as usual, it is a pleasure to have you on board. I'll bring you the latest news from across the continent of Africa. We start with the Kenyan newspapers, and we shall look at the headlines. We start with the Star newspaper. The main headline: EACC cast doubt on Samruto CS picks. Agency says nominees must pass the integrity test before they're formally appointed. That story is on page 4 and 5 on the Star newspaper. Jamia Mosque Imam, renowned for pragmatic sermons, dies at the age of 73. The story is on page 2. And the main pictorial there, all in a day's work. The first picture there is DP Rigathi Gachagua and President William Ruto and NSC Chairman Kiprono Kitonyi during the launch of NSC Marketplace in Westlands yesterday. And then just below that is MP Felix Odiwuor, that is Jalango, and Azimio leader Raila Odinga and MP Babu Owino at Bunge la Wananchi sitting in Jivanji Gardens yesterday. And I must say that it really elicited a lot of reaction from Kenyans. All right, so state to auction 10 parastatals to boost NSC listing. The government will list at least 10 state-owned enterprise at the NSC in 12 months to reawaken the capital market. The government will bring 6 to 10 companies to the market through the initial public offerings. That story is on page 11. Locals dance with crocodiles as lake swells. I don't know what kind of a dance that is, but on August 9th, 2021, a 13-year-old Cherob Samu bid her class teacher farewell and promised to report school early the next day. Dressed in a clean uniform, she was killed by a crocodile later that afternoon. That's a deadly dance right there. The story is on page 14 and 15 of the Star newspaper. We turn our attention to the Standard newspaper. Raila Kalonzo new plan to rein in Ruto. Azimio leaders lead an onslaught against lifting of ban on GMOs, saying the country is ill prepared for the adoption of genetically modified foods and joins Kenyans in protesting the high cost of living. Yeah, the story is on page 4. President plans to sell 10 parastatals by the end of 2023. You'll find that on page 6. Safaricom next after Airtel split. That is on page 22. Tunisia faces acute food shortage. You'll find that on page 24. Kipchoge gift organs to save lives. All right. And told story of Uganda military training to topple Moi. That also is on page 14 and 15. It is a book serialization series there on the Standard newspaper. MPs down to business after House Committee node. That is on page 8. The Daily Nation, Raila takes on Ruto. That is the main headline. Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition chiefs Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka attack President William Ruto's government over the rising cost of living and the lifting of a decade-long ban on genetically modified organisms, the GMOs. And why sugar prices are on steep rise, that is on page 12. And national exams to start on November 28th, says Magoha. Marking will be completed in December and results released by January 23rd next year. That is on page 2. 10 state farms to be listed in 1 year. I think the same story on the other newspapers. COVID scandal. 1.6 billion Kenya shillings vaccine doses can't be traced, says audit. And the national and county governments cannot account for about 3 million COVID-19 vaccine doses worth at least 1.6 billion Kenya shillings. A Dunning special audit report has revealed. The story is on page 10 on the Daily Nation. Let's look at some of the headlines from across the continent, and that we start with the daily news from Zimbabwe. All eyes now on inline Congress, where ED, that is Emerson Mnangagwa, will choose ZANU PFS a new Politburo with 2023 in mind. Okay. Now, Newsday also from Zimbabwe, Russia, chopper ambulance for ED. Okay. The Nation, that is from Nigeria, I'll leave a secured country. Buhari assures Nigerians he will leave a secured country. That is interesting, and we'll have that conversation once I'm done with the rest of the news. The Guardian, also from Nigeria, honors Buhari, decorates Lawan, Okonjo Iweala, UN scribe, and others. And then Stop Blame Games campaign with Buhari's records, PDP tells ruling party. That is interesting. Daily Monitor, over 7,000 SACCOs miss PDM money. That is from Uganda, and the new vision also from Uganda. 3,000 SACCOs get 80 billion Uganda shillings PDM cash, and that other one also is from Uganda, but I can't read that. I think it's in Luganda or something. That is The Citizen from Tanzania. Why goat meat is Tanzania's next gold? Okay. The Daily Telegraph from the UK. Sterling falls as bank pulls plug on pension help. And the Guardian also from the UK. All right, let me just get that. The Guardian. Power giants to face a windfall tax after all as Truth delivers U-turn. So that is what we have. So you are now up to date, but let me bring us a detailed bulletin for some of the stories that I've just taken you through there in the headlines. And we start with Ethiopia. Residents in an area of Ethiopia's Amara region that was recently retaken by government troops have accused soldiers from the Tigray region of abuses, including extrajudicial killings. The districts of Raya Kobo was held for 5 weeks by Tigrayan forces. Residents told the BBC that people suspected of belonging to pro-government militia were targeted. All sides of the conflict in northern Ethiopia have previously been accused of violating international human rights. A joint investigation done last year by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, EHRC, and the United Nations Human Rights Office said there could also be evidence of war crimes. Extrajudicial executions, torture, rape, and attacks against refugees and displaced people were documented. Tanzania is seeking assistance from the international community and humanitarian agencies to repatriate more than 120,000 Burundian refugees. They currently live in 2 camps in western Tanzania's Kigoma region near the Burundi border. While humanitarians say conditions there may be better than at home, there have been allegations by rights groups and the UN that Burundian refugees have suffered abuses, including arbitrary arrest and enforced disappearance on the hands of Tanzania officers in cooperation with Burundian authorities. Neither country has commented on these allegations. Speaking at a UN refugee agency meeting in Switzerland on Tuesday, Tanzania's Internal Affairs Minister Hamad Masauni said Burundi needed support to encourage and facilitate voluntary repatriation. In 2006 and 2007, Tanzania granted citizenship to 160,000 Burundian refugees. The Nigerian military says it has killed more than 30 gunmen, including the leader of a kidnapping gang, during airstrikes in the northwestern state of Kaduna. The Nigerian Air Force says Ali Dogo, known as Yellow, has fled with his fighters from neighboring Niger state following military bombardment there. A spokesperson said the group was traced to a house which was targeted. He said that the kidnapping gangs were also hit in Mando in Kaduna state. There has been no independent confirmation of the military claims. The Nigerian authorities have been struggling to stop frequent killings and kidnappings for ransom across the country, particularly in northwest region. Members of Somalia's journalists union say their leader has been arrested after he openly criticized the new government restrictions on the reporting of militant Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Abdallah Ahmed Mumin was arrested by armed intelligence officers on Monday evening. According to the Somali Journalists Syndicate, the government has not yet commented. Somalia has consistently ranked poorly in media freedom surveys due to threats against journalists by the government and militant groups. The government says the restrictions are aimed to countering Al-Shabaab's sophisticated propaganda campaigns, but Mr. Mumin said it will silence some critics. Since the new reporting rules came into force, the authorities have suspended dozens of social media accounts and banned several websites over the alleged affiliation with the militant group. Somali internet providers were also ordered to restrict access to these outlets. The United Nations Refugee Agency says it is alarmed by a surge of deadly intercommunal violence which has displaced thousands of people in the west of the Democratic Republic of Congo. At least 140 people have been killed since July around Kamwolf town in Mai, Ntombe province. The clashes are fueled by a long-running land dispute and escalated when chiefs from the Teke community told the Yaka people to pay them more taxes. UNHCR says 27,000 people, mostly women and children, have been displaced by the violence. Some have sought refuge in forests, having abandoned their farms and granaries. More than 2,500 have fled across the border to Congo-Brazzaville. head over to Lesotho, and the multi-millionaire businessman who is to become the new Prime Minister of Lesotho says he is going to use his commercial experience to create jobs and tackle corruption, which he describes as the country's worst disease. Sam Matekane formed the Revolution for Prosperity Party just 6 months ago and has gone into a coalition with two others after narrowly missing out on an absolute majority in the elections. He told the BBC Focus on Africa Radio that retraining and securing security forces was also a priority as some of its members had been politicized. The diamond magnate denied there would be any conflict of interest between his business activity and his position as head of the government. Lesotho has had a succession of fragile coalition governments over the last decade. We go to Uganda. For the first time since Uganda's Ebola's outbreak began last month, a patient has died in the capital city, Kampala, bringing the total number of deaths since the last month to 19. There are no known active cases in Kampala, but this death is the latest confirmation of the spread of the virus from its epicenter in the central region, something worried health workers had urged the government to prevent by placing that region under quarantine. The man who died of Ebola in Kampala had been identified by health teams as potentially having had contacts with the virus, but he then ran away from his village and sought help from a traditional healer in another region, according to Uganda's Health Minister Jane Ruth Acheng. The man died at Kirudu National Referral Hospital on Friday. And there has been public anger in Nigeria after an illegal pipeline was discovered that had been siphoning oil from export Tamilo for over 9 years. The line is 4 kilometers long and runs into the sea. It was found during a clampdown on oil theft over the past 6 weeks in the oil-producing Niger Delta region, the state oil company NNPCL said. The authorities have not said whether the culprits have been arrested. It is unclear how much crude oil had been stolen through the illegal pipeline. Previously, the Nigerian authorities said the oil-dependent economy loses an estimated 600,000 barrels of crude oil every day, roughly 30% of its output, partly due to oil theft. Oil theft from inland pipes or from at-sea oil refineries is common in the Niger Delta, but stealing oil using covert pipeline running into the ocean is extraordinary and suggests a more advanced method used by the thieves. The head of the state oil company, Mele Kyari, said that the security measures they have been taking are paying off, but outraged Nigerians on social media are asking why such a pipeline was able to operate for years undetected. We head over to Chad, and the Prime Minister resigned on Tuesday, the day after General Mohamed Idris Deby Itno announced the appointment of a government of national unity. Jamena said after extending his 2-year term as president for a period of transition, Albert Pahimi Padake presented his resignation and that of his government during an audience with the head of state, who accepted them. According to a presidential statement, he was appointed 18 months ago by Mohamed Deby. On Monday, Deby was sworn in as president for a new 2-year period of transition to free and democratic elections, which he promised 18 months ago. On April 20th, 2021, a military junta of 15 generals propelled him to the head of this vast Sahelian country after the death of his father Idris Deby Itno, killed at the front against rebels after ruling without sharing power for 30 years. In his inaugural speech on Monday, the 38-year-old strongman of Jamena promised a government of national unity in the very next few days and to do everything possible for a return to constitutional order and power to civilians at the end of that transition. We go to Cameroon, and in Cameroon, hundreds of displaced girls have protested the conflict that have disrupted or halted their education. Close to a million Cameroonian children have lost school time in recent years due to the separatist conflict in western regions and Boko Haram terrorism on the borders with Chad and Nigeria. The demonstrators are calling on Tuesday for better security for children, especially girls, so that they can return to classrooms. The government says hundreds of girls demonstrated in several cities, including Yaoundé, Bamenda, and Kumbo in the northwest region, Buea, Kumba, and Limbe in southwest region, and Marua in the northern border. The protest was scheduled to coincide with the UN International Day of the Girl Child. The day is meant to recognize girls' rights and the challenges they face around the world. Cameroon separatist groups accuse the government of attacking schools and blame the attacks on the separatists, an allegation the government denies. Human Rights Watch says both sides are responsible for attacks on schools. The United Nations says the separatist crisis that began in Cameroon's English-speaking western regions in 2016 has deprived some 750,000 children of an education, a majority of them girls. It says another 250,000 have been deprived of learning in the north because of the Boko Haram conflict. And we head back to Somalia, and Somalia is getting support for its campaign to have an arms embargo lifted after Ethiopia joined Uganda in backing the action. The UN Security Council is yet set to vote in November on renewing the partial ban, which Somalia says should be removed so it can better fight Al-Shabaab terrorists. Ethiopia's support came after a July incursion by Islamist militants into Ethiopia amid a large-scale offensive by Somalia and its allies against the group. Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed say the 3 decades-long UN Security Council sanctions should be removed so Somalia can better fight the militant Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Somalia called on African Union member states in July to support its campaign to lift the embargo, which includes bans on high-caliber weapons and military vehicles. The Somali-based security research group Hira Institute said in February reports the arms embargo was failing to stop Al-Shabaab from smuggling weapons that federal forces were not allowed to buy. The Institute's Samira Guide said Somalia's capabilities are limited because it needs permission from the UN Security Council members to buy certain arms. And then we go to Burkina Faso. Several hundred of students demonstrated on Tuesday as well. The other demonstration was from Cameroon, the English-speaking region. And this one is from Burkina Faso. And the main city in northern Burkina Faso under jihadist blockade for several months to claim their right to education, including sending of teachers. The young demonstrators walked the streets of the city carrying signs that read, "We are also Burkinabe. We have the right to education, and education is a right for all. School is dotted in Djibo." Then they gathered in front of the offices of the High Commission of the province of Soum, where they were received by the prefect of Djimbo, Morua Libodo. According to their spokesperson, Ali Diko, the students asked to have teachers flown in, communications networks restored, and the city secured, among other requests. According to the National Union of Secondary and higher education teachers, and the current school year is marked by the closure of more than 4,258 schools, which affects over 700,000 students throughout the country. And he also added that the famine, including in some towns in Djibo, the main teachers is also causing other problems in recent months. Attacks affecting dozens of civilians and soldiers have multiplied in the north and the east of Burkina Faso, where cities are now subject to a blockade by jihadists. On September 26th, a supply convoy of more than 200 trucks bound for Djimbo was attacked by armed men in Gaskinde. At least 37 people were killed, including 27 soldiers and 10 civilians, according to the army. This deadly attack, claimed like many others by Al-Qaeda, was seen as the catalyst for the coup d'etat of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who took power on October the 2nd, overthrowing Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaungo Damiba, who led the coup on January 24th of the democratically elected President Roch Marc Christian Kabore. And that marks the end of our bulletin this morning. You are now up to date. Thank you so much, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, depending on where you're tuned in and you are joining us from. I'm now joined by Samuel Tawish. Samuel Tawish, a very good morning to you. Okay, so as we wait for that news must have got longer, so hopefully he will join. Tawish, just let me know when you're back there. A very good morning to you if you can hear me. And so I'd like for us, as I wait for Tawish to come, we look at this story, a few stories, maybe one from Kenya. And the EACC now cast doubt on some Brutus CSS picks over integrity test issues. So that is a conversation that perhaps I'll... Tawish, if you can hear me, a very good morning to you. Very well. So we'll just move on from that. And I'd like for us to look at this story from not Burkina Faso. I think we've talked about Burkina Faso so much. We've talked about Cameroon, the crisis between the Anglophone, in the Anglophone region, between the Anglophones and the government of President Paul Biya. So yesterday was International Girls' Child Day. And we know in the Anglophone region, a lot of schools are closed down because of the crisis that was reignited. This is a crisis that goes back over 50 years ago, but was reignited in 2017 when the national government in Cameroon under President Paul Biya decided, you know what, part of the Cameroon, the larger part speaks French and the other part speak English. Cameroon was colonized by two countries, France and Britain. Then later on, Britain left, and then it's a whole history. I'll not get into it right now. So there has been a crisis since 2017 when the government decided that even the schools and the other parts of the Anglophone-speaking regions were supposed to start communicating using French as the official language, and so the protest started by teachers and lawyers. That was the initial vote. That were the people who organized the first protest, and that has culminated into a crisis in that region. But I think just last week there was a change of that. Remember, there was a national dialogue that took place in 2019 where they're supposed to sort out some of these issues. The government put up a national dialogue, and the language thing was a key agenda in that meeting. And so I think last week President Paul Biya was asking for some of these resolutions that were reached in this dialogue to start implemented in Cameroon, and one of them was to allow for the bilingualism. So if you were an English-speaking person and you go to the French side and you're seeking any kind of service, there should be somebody there who is able to translate, and any official written materials should have a translation. There should be two, one in French and one in English, just to ensure that that in the hopes of just fostering national unity. I don't know if that is enough, but perhaps that is a good step. But anyway, schools in the Anglophone region have been closed now since 2017. A lot of them are burnt down, hospitals, schools and things like that, because of the increased crisis. They're calling for secession. They're calling themselves Ambazonians, so they want to have their own countries, the Anglophones, and they want to call it Ambazonia, and that has been one of the many forgotten conflicts here in the continent. And so yesterday, just like those girls in Burkina Faso, these girls also in Cameroon from that region are protesting, and they're asking for them to be allowed to go to school and to learn. You can see over nearly 1 million children have been out of school from that region, and I think that is quite a disadvantage. Can you imagine in 10 years' time or 15 years' time, the children from the other part of Cameroon have been going on with their lives, their education have not been affected, and then you expect them to compete in the same level with these other kids from the Anglophone side who have been denied the opportunity to go to school and just be at their par with the rest of the children in the country. I think it's quite a disadvantage. So I'm hoping this is something that they can find a solution to, because it is unfair. But as I said, maybe the bilingualism law might be a good start, but obviously it's more than just a language thing. The issues in the Anglophone region goes beyond just French and English. It has to do with systematic, marginalization of a people who feel they're being treated as a second-class citizens there in Cameroon. So that is something they will have to address. I don't know if that will be possible as long as President Paul Biya is still the president. He's the second longest serving president in the continent, and I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. I think he'll just die there in power. I think come November next month, he would have served for 40 years. Yes, come November next time, he took over from his uncle. Long stories, I'll not get too much into that, so I'll just leave that there. Samuel Tawish, if you can hear me, a very good morning to you.
Very good morning to you, Miriam Ogutu from our communication headquarters, and also good morning to our viewers who are watching the program in Kenya, Africa, and the rest of the world. Indeed, it's my great pleasure to join you on this program this morning when we discuss matters to do with the African continent, and also, more importantly, matters global. Thank you so much, Miriam.
All right, nice to have you. So I will not get back to that Cameroon story. I think I'm done with that. But I want us to talk about something from Somalia. We haven't touched on Somalia for quite a while, and I had a couple of stories here, but I think one just captured my attention before we get into some a news item there on Kenya that I also want us to look at. So Somalia is getting support for its campaign to have an arms embargo lifted after Ethiopia joined Uganda in backing the action. The UN Security Council is set to vote in November on renewing the partial ban, which Somalia says should be removed as it can better for it to be equipped better to fight the Al-Shabaab terrorists. Ethiopia's support came after a July incursion by Islamist militants into Ethiopia amid a large-scale offensive by Somalia and its allies against the group. So what Somalia is asking for, Somalia, South Sudan, I think right now they are having an arms embargo because of the state of how they are and the continued conflict. So an arms embargo was imposed by the United Nations, and the UN Security Council is meant to renew this one of Somalia next month. So they're saying they, as much as the state is not allowed to get these weapons and these arms that they need, they really need in the fight against Al-Shabaab. But they're also saying that the terrorists, the Al-Shabaab, for some reason, are able to access these weapons. So this disadvantages the government forces. So I don't know, is it about time for this arms embargo to be lifted against Somalia?
Thank you so much, Miriam, and more so on bringing up that topic for discussion. And I think, Miriam, the issue of Somalia, South Sudan, and most of these countries that have been experiencing some insecurity issues, and more so when you come to the case of Somalia, as regards to the Al-Shabaab militants in Somalia, it's been a very big threat and a very big security risk in Somalia for so many years now. And I think the continued concerted effort from the region, especially the African continent, has to some extent paid off in terms of trying to pacify that region and also try to bring about some semblance of peace and tranquility and also security in that region, including even training the soldiers in Somalia. That in itself means they're going to have the capacity to be able to deal with the insecurity challenges themselves when, of course, the troops that have been contributed by the region really exit that country eventually. But I think the question here is about the embargo by the United Nations and, of course, the UN Security Council. And I think that appeal by Somalia is a genuine one, is one which must be listened unto and a lot of consideration given unto it, because again, it doesn't really make sense that the government, in as much as it's trying to deal with the menace that is Al-Shabaab, that it cannot be able really to get enough weaponry to deal with the Al-Shabaab, which now are able really to illegally or from whichever kind of proxies they get this sophisticated weaponry to be able to destabilize that country. So I think it is an appeal which is genuine, one which must be given consideration, utmost consideration, Miriam, because by the end of the day, there's no way we are going to empower soldiers if they do not have enough of course, machinery to be able to, of course, to combat any attacks that come from, of course, the Al-Shabaab militants or any other threats that really that country is facing. So this is more so. I think the United Nations and the UN Security Council must be in a position to listen unto this, and I think. From virtue of common sense, Miriam, the Al-Shabaab militants really deal with much more sophisticated weaponry. And we have had experience as a country, of course, also dealing with how they've been making attacks. For example, in Kenya here, it's not something that you will say you only but have to train soldiers, but they do not have enough machinery and enough weaponry to be able to deal with this militant. So I think it is something that must be given consideration. I largely agree with Somalia as a government that these embargoes have to be lifted so that they're able really to deal or to level the kind of insecurity challenges that they're experiencing as a country. Because Miriam, as it is today, you cannot say that we will send the troops, even if they are in the millions, Miriam. How will they be able to deal with these Al-Shabaab militants or any security threats if they do not have these weaponry, say guns or even other weapons of war, to be able to deal with this. So it's a welcome move. I think the UN Security Council must give consideration to this request, Miriam.
All right, thank you so much. And still, just staying with Somalia, just a little bit more. This other story about Somalia's government announced on Saturday a crackdown on media outlets that publish what it deems propaganda for the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab, and warned that offenders will be punished. Deputy Information Minister Abdi Rahman Yusuf said the move comes as Somalia's armed forces, backed by local militias and international allies, wage an aggressive counter-offensive against the Al-Qaeda affiliate. So Yusuf said the government has also launched cyber operations against terrorist accounts on social media. So what the government of Somalia, through its spokesperson, is saying is that the media, especially in Somalia, cannot broadcast or cannot publish content about Al-Shabaab in a way that seems to glorify what Al-Shabaab are doing, because sometimes that is just free publicity for them. So I guess my question will be, where do we draw the line between information access and national security matters? Is there a way that perhaps the journalists in Somalia could still tell the country and the people and the world indeed what is happening and what Al-Shabaab is doing, without looking like they're glorifying or they're giving them unnecessary publicity, and also consider matters national security? Where do we draw the line on that?
Indeed, Miriam, it's a tough balancing act, especially for the from the journalism fraternity to be able to really draw the line. Drawing the line in the sense that you need also to inform the public about the happenings, but also at the same time not really putting the security of that particular populace or a nation at a risk, or trying to glorify the acts of terrorism as of course being alluded to by that information minister in Somalia. I think by and large what needs really to happen, because you cannot gag the media from doing their work, but I think it is more of like a consensus or a dialogue that we will invite between the journalists working in that country and of course the government officials, more so those responsible on the the security operation in that country, and also the information department, to see into it how they can be able to cohesively work together, not denying the public really the information which is critical, at the same time also not glorifying the acts of terrorism that are being perpetuated by the Al-Shabaab militants, because by the end of the day, Miriam, it will appear like we are trying to glorify, we are trying to give more impetus, or we are trying to make them appear like they've won, when of course the journalists decide to publish this uncensored information, uncensored news. So I think what needs really to be done is the extent with which this information is going to be censored before of course you finally decide to publish or even broadcast them for public consumption. And I think that is where the attention of the government is really drawn, and I will largely support, but it should not be a case of really not informing the public about what is happening, because by the end of the day, what will be the work of the journalists? It is about informing the public, giving them news, but this news also must be factual, they must be verifiable, and they must not in the long run also pose major or more threat beyond what maybe that country is experiencing. So journalists also must be dictated by their conscience, and to understand that in as much as they have the responsibility and the mandate to give information to the public, the same information must not be toxic, must not be that which is going to make the situation even worse. So they must sit down together. That is the journalism leadership in Somalia, as well as the government officials, and see into it how they're going to strike the balance and make sure that in as much as they continue with their work, of course, they also must be cognizant of the fact that this work must not go to the level or the extent of jeopardizing the security operation, or even trying or attempt to glorify the works by the Al-Shabaab militants in Somalia. Because more often, Miriam, we have seen when the Al-Shabaab militants, of course, carry out these heinous acts, they tend really to be very, very excited, very happy, and they will be they will feel like they've really won say, government apparatus, when this information gets out, regardless which channel you use, whether it's on social media or even mainstream media, they will want this information really to go out as though they're winning or subduing the government operatives and operations. So I think there has just to be that line, balancing act. But the two institutions must really work hand in hand to see into it what is of necessity and for, for healthy consumption of the people of that particular country, and also for them to be allowed to give information as, of course, their duty dictates media, or call of duty dictates media.
Very well, indeed, a very tricky balancing act there. Okay. So Tanzania is seeking assistance from the international community and humanitarian agencies to repatriate more than 120,000 Burundian refugees. And I'll not read the whole of this story, but this is something that I've come across every so often. And it started when President Magufuli was still in power, and Tanzania has been making attempts. Remember, after the unsuccessful coup that happened in 2015 when the former president, Pierre Nkurunziza, decided, he's now dead, the late president, Pierre Nkurunziza, decided to run for a third illegal term. Remember the constitutional coup that sparked another civil war there in Burundi, and the failed coup attempt. And so it saw an increase and an influx of more refugees from Burundi to Tanzania. And just before that, there had been wars in Burundi in the 90s, starting from the 80s, that has continuously seen a steady influx of refugees from Burundi to Tanzania, being because of their proximity. And of course, there are a lot of Burundians and Rwandese, I think I've noted also here in Kenya, in Nairobi particularly. But I'll digress. That is a story for another day. But Tanzania, I think, is feeling as if it's being overburdened by the refugee, by the refugees who have come, to seek for a safer space there in Tanzania, especially from Burundi. And Magufuli was repatriating them by force. I remember there are a lot. A good number of refugees that were taken back to Burundi by force. And that, of course, was met with a lot of criticism from the international community. And now, right now, also Tanzania is insisting again of repatriating over 120,000 refugees. And these refugees from Burundi don't want to go back to Burundi. I know we want to think that Burundi is peaceful, but actually it's not. If you pay attention to the news that comes from Burundi, you will realize that the wars that have been happening, and Burundi has seen a lot of coups, by the way. And the ethnic tensions still continue that were planted by the colonialists, still continue there in Burundi. So whether we are aware of that or not, but that is still a thing. The Hutus and the Tutsis, they still have some very bad blood, and that also is pegged on the colonial era seeds that were of hatred and all that was sown during that time. So that has continued, and Burundi has not known peace. So insisting for these people to go back to a place where they don't feel safe is, and what I hear is Tanzania saying how this is a burden to them, and I can understand when you look at, because I've looked at a few documentaries and news from that area, so I sort of have an understanding of what at least is happening there. But also Burundi's government has been very quiet. It does not seem to have any plans or make any assurances to its people that it is safe now. President Evariste Ndayishimiye, your people are suffering, that it is safe now, you can come back home. Why has this burden been left to Tanzania? And as much as refugees are not supposed to be repatriated by force, but what is Tanzania to do in this regard when Burundi is not so much concerned about, having their people back?
Miriam, firstly, I think Burundi really needs to be concerned, and so much so to the extent that they have to make sure that the people who ran away or fled because of the political violence in Burundi must now be able to go back home. Now that we have a new administration in place, we have peace and the security has been restored, and I think it is time for them really to go back home. But the same must be facilitated by the government of Burundi. Understand, once they become refugees, as is the case now, of course that becomes an issue or a case of international concern, and not necessarily Burundi alone. But I think it must really strike in the conscience of the president of Burundi and the leadership that it is time for them really to bring about the healing and the restoration, not only with the people who are living in Burundi today, but for most of her citizens that really fled that country owing to the political violence that was really occurring in that country. And Miriam, we all understand that these programs to really host refugees is not really a permanent plan or organization as such. It is more of a temporary assistance to citizens and dependents owing to the security challenges that maybe they are going through from their country of origin. That does not mean that, for example, nations that really these people came from cannot go back when, of course, the situation at home has stabilized. And I think Kenya has equally been experiencing almost similar challenges with an influx of refugees really mostly drawn from Somalia because of those, the kind of fights and chaos we have been witnessing in Somalia. Kakuma and refugee camps today are really they're full to the brim, and Kenya has been making in some instances even threats to forcefully take back the refugees or ask them to go back. But I think it must be done in a dignified and a humane way, in a way that does not compromise the dignity of the citizens or the refugees, so that even as we ask them to go back home, we must do it in a way that respects, of course, the human dignity. That must be really underscored. But away from that, I think this is a matter that calls for a well-concerted effort, and more so from all the players, and not only Burundi. Want to see the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, that is the UNHCR, also coming on board and seeing if there are any setbacks in terms of facilitating these people to go back to their homes, and also seeing, for example, when they go back home, are they going to settle in the places that they used to live previously, or are there some things that really needs to be done before they go back home? Maybe they were displaced from their homes and we have other people living there. It may become a very difficult thing for them to go back to those places, because maybe there are other people occupying those places, or the security situation in the places that they ran away from is not stable enough to guarantee a safe return for them. So I think it is something that needs a broad-based kind of consultation and approach coming from, the wider players. And in this respect, those who are dealing with the issues to do with the refugees in the world, the UNHCR, as well as, of course, Burundi as the country that we are dealing with in this respect, that they should come on board and see into it how these people can really be able to go back to their homes and continue with their lives and also rebuild their nation. It is not Miriam, a good really scene. It's not a good feel, a good experience for people who have run away from violence, run away from genocide, just to be left like that. Because even for Tanzania, they have their own citizens. They may be having a limited budget to be able to take care of, excess population, one which they are not envisaged. But thanks to the treaties that we have signed and being part and parcel of the global world, we are able really to also host our brothers and sisters, those who have been hard hit in terms of the crises on various aspects, be it political or otherwise, that we are able to host them and give them a temporary sanctuary as their countries stabilize, and so that by the end of the day they can be able to go back home. So I call upon those respective organs, the UNHCR, to really work hand in hand with the Burundi government as well as Tanzania, the host country, to see into it how these people can go back to their country, Miriam. It's a good thing to do for them.
Okay. All right. Very well. Thank you so much. And maybe soon, I think we should just have a show and we focus on what is really going on in Burundi. I know the new president came into power. The other one died under unclear circumstances. Remember, President Pierre Nkurunziza, I think he died in Nairobi. I'm not sure. He was rushed here during the height of COVID. So, and there's not much information coming from Burundi, so we need to find out what's really going on in there. Okay, so some news that caught my attention on the Star newspaper. Page 4 and 5, EACC cast doubts on some Ruto CSS picks. The ethics watchdog has promised to hand Parliament integrity dossiers from cabinet nominees, signaling an explosive vetting of President William Ruto's picks. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on Tuesday said it was compiling reports on the suitability of each of the nominees to block those with questionable integrity. The EACC spoke as the opposition piled pressure on the anti-graft agency and Parliament to stay true to their mandate. The appointees committee must take this matter very seriously. Former Vice President and Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka told journalists at a press conference on Tuesday, and I want to ask the EACC and other governance institutions to really prove to us that they are up to the task of fulfilling the mandate the Kenyan taxpayers have put on them. Kalonzo alleged that some nominees are planning to bribe MPs to give them a clean bill of health. If you accept any of them, heaven will take up your case. He said, let us follow our 2010 constitution to the latter and its spirit. Candidates who should clearly be in jail, then they bribe you and you give them this appointment. This will be defeating the purpose of ethical vetting, he stated. And it has emerged that the EACC will on Wednesday, that is today, submit to the National Assembly its reports that will form the basis for the approval hearings for the cabinet nominees. EACC Assistant Director, Corporate Affairs and Public Communications, Eric Ngumbi, said the nominees must pass the suitability test before they are formally appointed by the President. And we know there are people who have some cases. They are like Aisha Jumwa, I think Mithika Linturi, Amasjikama, all his cases have been cleared. They have been on a cleansing. It has been a wave of cleansing going on, some of these individuals. But Aisha Jumwa still has a case in court among others, and yet she has been nominated. So I guess before we even get into that, Samuel Tawish, because these are conversations we were having even just running up to the general election. Some of these people should not even have run to on any elective positions based on their issues to do with integrity, but they were allowed. And the same EACC said it will allow them to run because they did not want to look like it was a political witch hunt. And so they stopped these cases for people like Aisha Juma and the rest and allowed them to run. So how can they now come here and say they have a dossier? So these people who have been nominated, they cannot be allowed to hold public office. What is different from them being a CS and them running as elected members? They're all public offices.
Miriam, is a very confusing scenario for the people of Kenya, more so who are looking up to these institutions really to give us direction and for them to be able really to reign on these individuals and even be able to be seen really to be doing their work, and not that they are held hostage by any person or any institution of government, because one cannot understand why we are having all these double standards when it comes to issues of integrity and character and the eligibility of these individuals really to be able to say stand for office, elective office, or even for appointive office, as is the case, Miriam, today. And as you have alluded to, of course, a good number of individuals who have been proposed by President William Ruto to really be to come and help him in the running of the affairs in his administration have a questionable character, have issues to do with integrity. Most of them really fall short of the chapter 6 of our constitution. And so, Miriam, one will really wonder why, leave alone the institutions, even the president himself, why he will give a blind eye and proceed with nominating these individuals, propose them to work in his cabinet. Really, it begs more questions than answers. Miriam, we want to see the yardstick that is followed in appointments of individuals to other key public offices, the civil servant, really must be also applied and followed to the latter when it comes to the appointment of individuals in the cabinet, because by and large, this is a very critical and integral part of government. When you talk about government, essentially, this is the government. This is an organ or institutions that is going to be tasked in the running in the day-to-day running affairs of the government. So you cannot expect that you have people who are of questionable character, people who are of low integrity, and people who, to some extent, also have been rejected by electorates in their constituencies or even in their counties, being appointed by the president to come to the cabinet. But Miriam, the biggest surprise that you're going to witness, Miriam, be it on the question of academic qualification, be it on the issue of integrity, be it on the issue of character, you're going to be surprised that our members of parliament who are supposed really to be to carry out due diligence when it comes to vetting of these individuals when they get to the respective departmental committees of parliament, are going just but to rubber stamp and approve of these names. Don't be surprised, Miriam. We have seen this happen in the past, but I think politics appears to have overtaken everything. It appears to overrun everything, including even the moral compass, including even our conscience, where we know very well that this individual does not fit even to be appointed as a cattle dip chair in the village. But we end up giving them the opportunity to serve as ministers. I do not know whether we do not give so much attention to this office, or is it because it does not really matter to us that by the end of the day, as long as you get your pay, say a lawmaker, then it doesn't really matter. I think it is time really these leaders must be reminded of their role, that of legislation, representation, and oversight. And also when it comes to really vetting these individuals, the nominees, they must do a good job, one which the Kenyan people will be very happy and proud of and say, yes, indeed, we have a representation and we have people really who represent our interests at the level which we have mandated them to do. But very unfortunately, Miriam, politics has taken center stage, and it is what is dominating today. So I'm not going to be surprised when these individuals are going to sail through in this particular what I will call a coronated kind of vetting, because I don't expect so much from the kind of questions they're going to pose, and even trying or the attempt to try and buy any of those individuals. Even so, I read yesterday one of the MPs, is Dagoretti North MP, that is Beatrice Elachi, coming out and saying, as women leaders, they're going to make sure that all the women who have been nominated for various cabinet portfolios, they're going to lobby and make sure that they all pass, regardless of any questions that are hanging on their head. So that in itself tells you that we have taken this debate, so casually, to the extent that we do not really care whether this person is of integrity, of his utmost character, as long as they belong to my religion, they belong to my gender, they belong to my tribe or to my political persuasion, then I have no reason really but to pass them or to allow them really to proceed to the next level. This is very unfortunate, and I really long to see when our country will grow to a level where we become a little bit serious and see the issues of integrity and character really being a yardstick and a determining factor in putting these individuals into office, even far from academic qualification, because you may have an individual or persons with impeccable academic qualification, but again, when it comes to integrity, when it comes to character, when it becomes to the issues of corruption, Miriam, they really top the list. They usually say, and I think that is the dictate of our constitution, that one is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And this is a debate that we've even had from time to time, that I think maybe it is time we need to sit down and also think how we are going to deal with this act as regards to the issue of innocence and being guilty. Because, Miriam, you cannot have an individual who is facing, say, a corruption charge or case, and being allowed again or given a green light really to contest for a public office or to be appointed by the president to get into office. But by the end of the day, I think we need to get down to work. The president needs to get men and women who are going to help him to work. And I will also plead to the opposition that those women and men who have been nominated by the president, those who do not have any questionable character or integrity issues, they should actually move with the speed and make sure that they are actually their names are approved so that the president can appoint them. We want to get back to business. This country must then move forward. These individuals are going to be very, very critical and integral in running the affairs of government and making sure that there's so many myriad of challenges that are going to affect some of the respective dockets that really they're going to come into are going to be addressed, Miriam. So we just want to see our lawmakers really do the right job. The issue of lobbying, the issue of being compromised or being paid a few coins, really just to rubber stamp these names, things that Kenyans are watching keenly to see if our lawmakers are going to do a different thing this time around. I submit, Miriam.
Okay. Now, the Constitution requires that they must all be vetted by the National Assembly before they are allowed to assume office as part of the requirements to enforce ethics and integrity. So that is the essence of them being vetted in Parliament to just safeguard the Chapter 6 of the Kenyan Constitution and to ensure that they actually do pass that and they're in compliance with that. Now, however, some of President's nominees face charges including murder, rape, and corruption. They have all denied wrongdoing. The law provides that one is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Public Service and Gender Cabinet nominee Aisha Juma has officially been charged in court with corruption and murder. Juma has 2 active cases, alleged murder and a 19 million Kenya shillings graft case on alleged embezzlement of CDF funds. And Agriculture Docket nominee Mithika Linturi, who was facing attempted rape charges last week, was handed a major reprieve after the court declared him following withdrawal by the complainant. Trade and Industry CS nominee Moses Kuria has also been on the radar of the EACC for awarding CDF tenders to companies linked to his close relatives. The EACC had, in fact, recommended prosecution of the vocal former lawmaker, and one of the nominees to a critical docket was adversely mentioned in the case of the collapsed Imperial Bank, in which depositors almost lost more than 40 billion Kenya shillings. Some other nominees have also been mentioned adversely in connection with graft and have previously been questioned by detectives. Okay. So Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity. Just a quick one on what that entails and what that is supposed to look for as far as the leaders and anybody holding public office is concerned. Matters personal integrity, competence and suitability, objectivity and impartiality in making decisions, selfless service, commitment to service, accountability to the public for decisions and actions. So in a nutshell, that is what Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya entails. So we shall wait and see how this will play out. Thank you so much, Samuel Tawish, for your time this morning. And thank you so much, our viewers, for watching. I'll be back here later with another conversation and other news making headlines from across the continent of Africa. This has been Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Good morning.